Okay, guys. First off, hope everyone had a good weekend. Um, this is one of those lessons, the Vietnam War, that I definitely don't spend enough time on. I just spend about two and a half periods on the Vietnam War. It's really not enough time. There's a couple of those topics in social studies where, like, I don't give it the justice and time it deserves. This is definitely one of those. The Vietnam War is complicated. It's also controversial. It's also the only war we really fully lose. We'll kind of get into the reasons why, but ultimately I could just say from the start, because the two countries, the country we're fighting against is pretty much backed by the Soviet Union. There's only so much we can do without making it a full-scale World War III. So you'll notice some differences between this and the Korean War, but let's just get some background and what's going on here. There's like 4 or 5 slides, but every slide's kind of like this one. There's just like, 2 or 3 sentences you need to copy down, not even a ton of notes. And then you'll get a good amount of time for the assignment a little bit later. So what were the causes and effects on the Vietnam War? Well, we'll look at like kind of the basics and the start of it today. For your double period assignment, you'll look at, why the war was controversial, specifically why a lot of people in the United States really didn't like it so much. And then we'll look at the mistakes we kind of made, eventually leading to our defeat in the Vietnam War. And it's a tricky war. So let's just kind of go into it. So let's establish the situation. Prior to 1950, Vietnam used to be controlled by France. In fact, they controlled all of the Indochina area, which is like the South Pacific area. So there's a lot of islands they owned over there, and Vietnam was one of those. You'll see a map of Vietnam a little bit later. All right, but if you're looking at a map of the world, it's kind of close to Korea, kind of close to Japan, in that area of Asia. And when it was controlled by France, eventually Vietnam became independent. They separated into 2 areas, like extremely similar to Korea. Remember how Korea had North Korea was communist, South Korea was capitalist? Okay, like Vietnam is like the same thing. Vietnam is separated between Vietnam is North Vietnam, which is communist, South Vietnam, which is capitalist and democratic. It's literally like the same setup as Korea. A little bit more details. There's some more dictators involved, even in South Korea. They have some, more authoritative governments. But ultimately, North Vietnam was communist and South Vietnam was not. So essentially, if you know how containment went with Korea, it's kind of the same thing. But we called it something different when the 1960s rolls around. We don't call it containment anymore. We call it something else. So in South Vietnam, okay, which is the place that we were allies with, their leader, Ngo Dinh Diem, was corrupt. He wasn't a good leader by any means. Even though we were allies with South Vietnam because they weren't communist, he wasn't a good leader. He mistreated many of the poor people in South Vietnam at this time, and this led to a new group being created in South Vietnam called the Viet Cong. Okay, there was like a rebellion taking place in South Vietnam. While that's kind of going all on, North Vietnam sees as an opportunity to kind of reunite Vietnam, under one particular country. So America was really worried that if South Vietnam leaders lost control from the Viet Cong and there was this kind of uprising, North and South Vietnam would become communist and become one country. It's the Korean War and Vietnam War are so similar in terms of that aspect. If you remember the Korean War and how it kind of got started, the Vietnam War is kind of the same way. The big difference is the Vietnam War lasts about like 17 years, where the Korean War lasts about 3.5. So let's keep it going here. So you have North Vietnam here, okay? You have Cambodia, Thailand, Laos, all right, China's out over here, and you're gonna have out over, if you can follow my mouse, Japan and other countries here. Okay, instead of being separated in the Korean War by the 38th parallel, they're separated by something called the 17th parallel, separated into 2 countries. Okay, we did not get along with North Vietnam. We got along with South Vietnam, but I think we also recognize that they weren't exactly treating their people so well. So they had some rebellions in South Vietnam. So it's a tricky situation. Okay, so what is this a picture of? I feel like I'm talking to kindergartners or first graders. What is this a picture of?
Domino effect.
Yeah, dominoes. Okay, and the idea is, if you ever played dominoes or stacked dominoes, you hit the first domino, you hit the next. It's going to basically knock down all the dominoes in front of it. So we're going to take this domino, and then I think Abigail said domino effect or domino theory. We're going to look at how this became a new foreign policy, and this is the foreign policy that basically gets us into the next war in Vietnam. So take a minute and copy this down. We'll go over what it means. Does communism affect trade? Well, with other countries? No, not necessarily. Within its own country, it should. You know, people really aren't really supposed to make transactions like that, I don't think, in a country. So I don't think people could trade with amongst one another, because I think the government controls all of that. But yeah, I mean, a communist country definitely trades with other countries. You know, there's no limit to that. In terms of effect, it may lessen, it may make it better. I really don't know. I'm not too sure about that. But there's definitely trade that does go on, for sure. Okay, so America is fearful of a full communist takeover in Vietnam. So they pushed their containment policy a little bit further, and they went to something called the domino theory. Now, understand, Vietnam was interesting, because when we came out with containment, Vietnam wasn't really a country, independent. So containment doesn't really work for Vietnam. So under containment, we can't say we're trying to prevent communism from spreading in Vietnam, because it wasn't originally communist. So we try and take it one step further to the American people, and we go over this idea called the domino theory. And the idea is, if one country becomes communist, it's a lot more likely in an area, the rest of the area and the countries around it will become communist as well. So I'm sure you're not done copying. I just want to show you. All right. The countries of Cambodia, Laos, Thailand, they're worried, those countries which are not currently communist, if Vietnam becomes communist, then it's going to spread like a stack of dominoes. So domino theory was kind of the reasoning where we say, you know what, we need to be a little bit involved in Vietnam. And when I say a little bit, we need to be, just in the beginning, a little bit involved in Vietnam. Okay? The Vietnam War goes from 1957, it really should be, I'm going to change this right now in front of you guys. It really goes officially to 1974. America's involved for all 17 years, just in the beginning and the end, they're not really that much involved. Okay, at one point they're very much involved, but like the first 5 to 6 years of the war, we're really not doing too much besides just sending maybe some money over. So when the Vietnam War gets started, okay, between North Vietnam and South Vietnam and the Viet Cong I'll talk about in a second, America's not too involved, okay? But we start getting more and more involved under this idea of the domino theory. It lasts 5 presidencies. Starts with Eisenhower, goes to John F. Kennedy, then goes to Lyndon B. Johnson. That's where a lot of the Vietnam War takes place. Richard Nixon, which you're going to learn about today and tomorrow, and then it's going to end with Gerald Ford. Okay, so it lasts the span of 5 presidencies. And each president has differing opinions on it, differing views on how much we should incorporate and send, troops or whatever. So it's a complicated war. Okay, this is not a hard question. I'm just giving you an example of what it means. If you could just remember domino theory relates to the Vietnam War, then you're fine. So obviously the correct answer is what? Yes, 1. 1 is correct. Okay, so it gets confusing. I could see people putting something with the Korean War. That's more of a containment thing. This is still under the umbrella of the Cold War, okay? But what we need to make it very apparent right now before we get into America's involvement in this war is the Soviet Union backs North Vietnam, okay? I often get asked, you know, why is Vietnam War the one war that we definitely lose? Is because we can only commit so much without getting the Soviet Union involved. And the Soviet Union is going to lose wars in like Afghanistan, like later on in the 70s, where they know they can't fully commit to fighting in those areas because they know the United States will get involved. So even though we don't ever fight the Soviet Union, has a huge impact in the way we handle things. All right, this is slide 3 out of 4. Yep. Okay, so halfway there. So this is now the first 7 years of the war. Okay, first 8 years. Okay, whatever it is. And look at how America's involved. Even just in a minor way, they know it's going on, but only see how America handles it early. Okay. So it's very often students get this confused because they're going to see Vietnam and the Viet Cong. So I want to make this clear what the war was really about when the United States gets involved. It's really a war from fighting North Vietnam and the Viet Cong. I'm writing this in the chat for you. Okay, which is the South Vietnam rebels versus South Vietnam and the United States. Okay, so after the Korean War, American leaders were careful with sending soldiers. They wanted to kind of just be more sending supplies and things. All right, they send military advisors out there. They discussed with South Vietnam. They said maybe we could use our brains to help the South Vietnamese fight in this war. Maybe they could use our supplies. And that's really what we try and do for the first 8 years of the war. We know what's going on. We want to be involved. We want to help, but we definitely don't want to be sending soldiers, if at all. Okay. Things get really bad in the year 1963. The same year JFK gets assassinated. A few months before that, Ngo Dinh Diem gets assassinated by the Viet Cong. So it's basically like a rebel group in South Vietnam assassinates their leader. Okay. This is a huge problem, because the South Vietnamese now have no leader, and if the Viet Cong take over, it's very likely the North Vietnamese will take over Vietnam and Vietnam will become fully communist. So this becomes our opportunity to send in the soldiers. One of the conspiracy theories going back to the JFK assassination is, like, a couple of weeks after JFK gets assassinated, we start sending more troops to Vietnam. So many people say that Johnson, orchestrated the attack. Okay, is a conspiracy thought. Orchestrated the attack on JFK so we can send more troops to Vietnam. All right, that's a thought, I guess, but it was interesting time. I'll say that for sure. Okay, so we sent the troops over, and now we, kind of get a little bit more involved than as opposed to just sending military leaders and sending people to go help out. All right, I'll give you another 20 to 30 seconds to copy this down, and then we will go into the final slide for today. Okay. So now we're going to get into a moment in American history that is certainly a little bit interesting. I'll let the video do the talking. All right, it's only 2 minutes long. I'll let the video do the talking, and then you'll kind of see where I'm going with this and why I'm saying interesting. So let me go to a situation here. Okay, There is this area called the Gulf of Tonkin. It's like we have the Gulf of Mexico, so south of China and east of North Vietnam, there's a Gulf here. The United States, we have some warships out there, one of which is called the USS Maddox, I believe, just out there in the Gulf of Tonkin doing just patrolling. It's pretty standard stuff when there's a war going on and you have, soldiers there or advisors. You have some military ships there to protect you as well. It's nothing unusual about that. All the wars have had that. Okay, something's going to happen here in 1964 that's going to dramatically change the Vietnam War. So let's take a look at what that is. Okay, so here's another view of it here. You have this kind of Gulf of Tonkin. It's in between China and North Vietnam, which is a huge communist area. It's a dangerous area, but it is international waters, meaning no one owns it, but it's surrounded by some communist countries that you're enemies with. All right, so let's take a look at this video. It's a little old, but I think it gets the point across. Minute 40 seconds. Take a look.
In August 1964, an American destroyer, the USS Maddox, on patrol in the Gulf of Tonkin, exchanged fire with North Vietnamese torpedo boats.
The President has asked that the destroyer force be doubled and that an air cap, a combat air patrol, be available at all times on call to it. And as I think you know, he's issued instructions that in the event of a further attack upon our vessels in international waters, we are to respond with the objective of destroying the attackers.
2 days later, the ship's captain thought he was again coming under attack. One of the pilots was not so sure.
Well, I was over those destroyers for over an hour and a half, below 1,000 feet, lights off, watching everything they did. I could hear them chatting on the radio, the Maddox and the Joy. They seemed to have some intermittent radar targets. I took it upon myself to get out there where they thought a boat was and try to kill it if they didn't. But it was fruitless. And I'd go down there and there was nothing.
Ignoring the conflicting evidence, the Pentagon insisted there had been a second attack.
In retaliation for this unprovoked attack on the high seas, our forces have struck the bases used by the North Vietnamese patrol craft.
Johnson used the incident to push the Tonkin Gulf Resolution through Congress. It would allow the president to wage war in Vietnam.
Okay, so just to summarize, there was an exchange of fire between the USS Maddox and the North Vietnam boats. That happened. We basically brought more ships into the area and said, if there's another attack, we're going to basically declare war, sort of thing. The USS Maddox said and claimed they went under fire again. But there's a lot of discrepancy around that. Not many people really had proof that this happened. So the message at the time was that the boat was attacked. Now, the boat didn't get sunk. No one died. Nothing happened. But the narrative was we got attacked. Now, these are people that lived through Pearl Harbor. So when things start getting attacked, they think back to World War II and Pearl Harbor and say, okay, we need to defend ourselves, sort of thing. So if the attack actually went down, I think that's something that we should all kind of get behind and maybe have to go defend our soldiers. The thing is, we don't really know if it went down. A lot of people say that this was just kind of made up, honestly. So I've told you in this class sometimes, perception is reality. If the perception was we were attacked, whether it was the truth or not, that's what everyone believed. Okay? So if you were learning about this in 1964 and 1965, you were in 100% belief that the Vietnamese just attacked one of our ships. Okay? Which we consider like an act of war, and obviously we need to get more involved. Okay, so this is the last slide for today. You're going to look at the Gulf of Tonkin resolution. Okay, this is a very controversial resolution, which is basically like a policy or a law that was passed. So take a minute and copy this down. This is the last thing for today.
We can't see it.
Just making sure you're all paying attention. Should be good now. All right. So basically, the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution was a declaration of war without it being a declaration of war. And this is bad. Remember in the Korean War, this is just a question. This is a good review for a unit test, which is going to be on Friday anyway. How did we get to war in Korea? Because we didn't declare war. Who remembers how we went about doing it? Yes, the United Nations. Okay, we went through the United Nations. We declared war through the UN. We don't even declare war through the UN this time. We kind of just passed this like foreign policy resolution that allows us to send troops. And here's the thing that angered a lot of Americans at the time is we didn't consider it a war. We just kind of considered it like a military exercise, not an exercise, that's not the right word, but just like, you know, it was just a military thing. Okay, it wasn't a war. When you send 500,000 troops, this becomes a huge issue. Now, at this point, there's no military draft, but spoiler alert for next period that you do this, there is going to be a draft, okay? Let me just kind of talk about some things. You'll get some more information than the assignment and things will kind of clear things up. This is a huge upset of checks and balances. I've said this before, I forget who I said it to, but sometimes like fear leads to more government control. So even though Congress really is losing a lot of power here, they don't really say much because they truly believe the USS Maddox was attacked by the North Vietnamese. Now, could it have been? Sure. All right, I wasn't there, you weren't there, but there's some kind of debated reports about that. The president right here in this war, Lyndon B. Johnson, pretty much declares war without going through Congress. All right, this was very controversial. All right, the Vietnamese fighters, specifically the Viet Cong, but also the people in North Vietnam, the soldiers in North Vietnam. Abigail, it seems like it's more proof that nothing happened. But I'm not 100%. I don't think any historian is, but it seems like nothing has really happened. All right, you'd have a lot more damage, okay, done. Okay, like the USS Maddox should be hit or things along those lines, or, you know, there should be some casualties. Like there was none of that. All right, were the Vietnamese that bad at shooting? I mean, I'm usually always for siding with America, trust me. But this is one of those that just seemed like it was like made up just to kind of get us out there. All right, if, you know, you could tell a little lie or something to kind of get what you want, maybe you do that. I don't know. All right. So the Vietnamese fighters were guerrilla warfare fighters. Now, I just want to go back. We were guerrilla warfare fighters during the American Revolution. So if you remember how that looked, okay, especially when we got up like to the middle of the American Revolutionary War, if you remember us like kind of hiding in the forest and shooting and running, that's what guerrilla warfare is. Vietnam was such a tough war to fight, okay? And really the biggest reason is North Vietnam and South Vietnam's a very tropical climate. It's very hot. It's very warm. There's a lot of jungles and swamps, which you don't need to be a military expert to understand. That's a very easy place to hide. So you had so many soldiers hiding in the jungles, hiding in bushes, hiding in swamps from the Viet Cong, and they would just unload an attack on American soldiers or South Vietnamese soldiers, and you couldn't do anything. You didn't know where they were. It was easy to get lost. It was easy to get confused. So interesting story. My father-in-law fought in the Vietnam War. He tells me stories all the time about how some of the fighting. And he said something like this, but I've heard this from other people, so he's not taking credit for this quote. But basically, the farmer you waved to in your Jeep earlier that day would be the same guy trying to kill you that night. You know, the people who you were fighting against looked like normal everyday people. They weren't even really in like soldier uniforms for the most part. They were everyday people in South Vietnam who were just rebelling, and you had to fight against them, but you didn't know who the enemy was. This is how a lot of modern warfare is fought. We get to the wars in the Middle East and stuff, and you look at some of even the fighting now between Israel and Palestine, okay, that is such stopped. I mean, you don't know who your enemy is sometimes. And the Vietnam War is really the first time you don't know where your enemy is, and even if they are your enemy. And what you don't want to do is just start bombing and napalming the crap out of innocent people. Maheen, that's a good question. He volunteered. This is a funny story. My father-in-law volunteered when because he thought he was going to be drafted. Now, when you volunteer as a soldier, you have choice on where you can go in the army and the military. So he got choice where to be kind of deployed and what to do. My father, okay, my biological father, not my father-in-law, not my wife's dad, my father got drafted. But you're going to learn in the next period, my father was in college when he got drafted, so he could defer his draft because he was in college, okay? My father-in-law would not have been drafted. So my father-in-law essentially went even though he would have never been drafted. It was kind of like one of those unlucky things where my father, who didn't volunteer, was drafted, but he didn't end up going anyway, which honestly, if he went, I maybe wouldn't be here right now. So I guess that's a good thing. But, you know, ultimately, this is what happens. So the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution is the law, I don't even know what else to call it, that gets us into the Vietnam War and allows us to send troops. And we just start with 500,000. In years, it's going to be millions of people we send over there, all for a cause, honestly, like, I'm going to say this, and you'll hear it a little later on. World War II, everyone was behind. World War I, 95% of the people were behind. The Civil War, good chunk of people behind. Obviously, you have some people a little bit hesitant with the slavery and ending that. Revolutionary War, a lot of people were behind. The Mexican-American War, a lot of people were behind. Vietnam War is not one of those. There was a lot of people almost like, why are we fighting this? Why are we literally sending thousands upon thousands of people to die, all for a cause of just maybe preventing communism from spreading? People weren't about it. Okay, so as bad as the Cold War was, and as bad as communism was to people, it wasn't this bad. They didn't want this to people lose all their lives over. Okay, so let me just go over some things before you guys get into the assignment. Let's see. All right. All right, so what you're working on here is a couple things. This video, there's no YouTube for the second period assignment. If you see the message, it's because the YouTube, there was it's blocked in this country. One of the videos I showed there was a copyright issue. So when you watch the video later, you just click on this and watch it. Not too long, 15, 20 minutes or whatever it is, okay? And then you have some DBQ practice for that, okay? This is what you're doing for the second period. Usual restate quote, very easy stuff. Nothing you guys aren't used to. You did this last week, okay? What you're working on today, though, is for the last 10 minutes while I take attendance. Sorry, just lost you there. You're working on this Vietnam War worksheet, 3 readings, okay? Okay, you have part A, part B, and then basically like a total of 11 questions that you guys have to work on. Yes, Aura, there will be notes you have to take from the video. I will go on the honor system. You don't have to post the notes. But yeah, you definitely want to get the notes down. All right? Tomorrow when we are done with the double period, we will wrap up the Vietnam War, and then we'll look at the new president, Richard Nixon, which he's a controversial one too. But he actually does okay with the Vietnam War. He does, I think, in my opinion, I know I shouldn't put my opinion, I think a lot better than Johnson. But that's for you guys to decide. All right. You guys have 10 minutes. Work on this. I'll be taking attendance. And let me know if you have any questions.